Great. So why don't we start kicking things off? Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ajay Kamat. I'm a partner at Pear. I'll do just a very quick intro on Pear, and then we can get started with our conversation. So Pear is a pre-seed and seed stage venture capital firm. We work with founders on their product and growth from the very early days, day zero of building a company. And our goal is to work with them all the way through IPO. We've been fortunate to partner very early with founders of DoorDash, Branch, Gusto, Garden Health, and many other game-changing companies. Additionally, we also host an accelerator twice per year. Our team works hands-on with a small number of startups over 3 months, ending in a large demo day. And if you're interested, the application deadline for our Pear Summer Accelerator is May 25th, and you can find out more information at pear.vc/accelerator. Today, I'm very excited to welcome Dennis Woodside to our online speaker series. Dennis is currently president at Impossible Foods, a company famous for making plant-based meats. Prior to that, he was a COO at Dropbox for several years through the IPO. And previous to that, he was a CEO of Motorola Mobility. And before that, he had a long career at Google. Dennis, thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with Impossible Foods. You've been there a little over a year. I'm very curious at this stage in your career why you decided to pick this company in particular and what you think the impact of this company could be.
Yeah, so if you think about what companies that potentially can change the world, I think Impossible is absolutely one of those. The basic premise is that the way that we provide protein for people is an antiquated technology that has incredibly harmful impact on the world, on biodiversity, on greenhouse gases and global warming. And nobody has innovated in the space. The incumbents collectively spend less than 1% of revenue on R&D. The supply chains that the incumbents have are very fragile, as we're seeing with COVID and the infections that you're seeing at slaughterhouses. So why can't you reverse engineer what gives meat its great taste and use science to replicate that taste without the cost, without all of the environmental cost? And over time, by reducing the actual cost of the product below the cost of beef, because the inputs, the raw inputs that go into our product are actually less than what go into a cow. You have to feed a cow, the cow takes up land. There's a efficiency loss in taking calories, feeding it to a cow, and then eating the cow. Why not just take the plants, create something that replicates the taste of beef, and skip the middleman, so to speak? So that premise, which Pat Brown came up with as a professor at Stanford for 30 years, that premise was really powerful, and I love the product, and they clearly had product market fit and a growing and very fervent consumer base. So all those things seemed kind of fun. It seemed kind of fun to go disrupt the food industry. This is you talk about big industries, $1.4 trillion global meat industry. In the US, we consume something like 20 billion pounds of ground beef a year. I read a stat, which I don't quite believe, but the average American eats 3 burgers a week. That seems too high. But wow. So if you can create a product that carves out a reasonable share in that huge market, then you have quite a successful business. So all those things were exciting to me. It's also fun to learn a new industry. I've always thought of myself more as a generalist than a specific industry type person, and it's not that hard to learn new industries if you have an open mind and spend the time trying to understand things. So it's been fun so far.
Great, really exciting. Obviously a very cool company. So the world has obviously changed in the last few months. And, particularly, this is not a software company. So I'm really curious how COVID and the pandemic have impacted your business.
Yeah, I mean, look, the good news is people have to eat. And there was already, in any big crisis, if you look back to the financial crisis or 9/11, the crisis tends to just accelerate trends that already existed. So you're seeing this now with delivery. Delivery was a thing before COVID, and this has just accelerated the consumption of delivery.
Right.
E-commerce obviously was a thing before COVID. We're just seeing an acceleration, and it's going to have both positive and destructive impact. And if you're a traditional retailer, this is devastating. If you're an online-only retailer, this is just accelerating what happened before. For us, we're just seeing an acceleration of existing trends. Consumers were looking for healthier options. They're looking for plant-based options in particular. They're more aware of the impact on the environment. And actually, the price gap between our product and animal products has narrowed as the shortages have caused animal products to be priced higher. Our economies of scale are driving our prices down. We reduced our prices 15% back in February, just coincidentally, right before this all happened. So we're seeing an acceleration now. The business of food is split equally in the U.S. between restaurants and grocery stores. And our business has a heavy restaurant component, which
Right.
obviously is suffering quite heavily. That's a short-term thing, and we're already seeing it come back. Whereas the grocery business has grown tremendously. So you saw people stocking up in early March. Even now, the baseline's like 10 to 15% above where it was. So on the demand side, we're shifting to focus more of our new product development, our launches in grocery. We launched Safeway, Albertsons a couple of weeks ago. We launched Kroger last week. We have another big launch in a week. But where the real challenge is we still have to produce the product, and that means we run factories, and we have multiple factories across the U.S. And so we've had to innovate, and how do you ensure a safe workplace for our workers who are going in and producing an essential product? Food is an essential product, so we're actually encouraged to produce. And so far we have not had an incident, but we've had to put in place all kinds of new processes to try to keep our workers safe and ensure that our suppliers' workers are safe as well. So that's been a whole new experience for us. And we're doing all this just like all of you, with a good portion of us working from home, not the whole company. But if you don't need to go to work, go into the office, you're not going into the office. And that adds another level of challenge to the whole thing.
And how about on the R&D side, with folks getting into the lab thinking about new products? How has that been impacted?
Yeah, so in food, there's two elements of R&D. There's real fundamental research. So we have, our R&D leadership team consists of PhDs from Stanford and Davis and San Luis Obispo and a bunch of other places. And that's fundamental research where you need to be in the lab to access certain equipment to research, the impact of a certain ingredient at a molecular level on taste or something like that. We held them out of the labs for the first phase of the lockdowns, and we're now selectively going back because there are certain products that we need to get moving on to continue to push the roadmap forward. And then you have R&D, which is much more applied. So let's say we're launching, we have a product in market that's a sausage product. We might have a variant of that coming out. You need to actually be in the manufacturing facility to make sure what you've built in the lab scales up in a manufacturing environment. So that's a different type of R&D. Those folks have been back for about 4 weeks now, and again, operating under strict security protocol.
That's really interesting. So are there any major changes that you've made personally to adapt in your work to adapt to this environment? I understand, for managers, working from home, managing multiple people has become much more difficult than if you're a typical IC.
I'd say, yeah. So the first change that probably everybody experiences is just the shock of going from a routine of kind of going into work every day and meeting people face to face and having some less structured interactions to, waking up, going down to your office, getting on Zoom all day. That's just a different way of working. And you miss the nuance that you pick up when you see people. You don't get a lot of conversations when you're live, you get energy from, you don't quite get that when we have to really think hard about celebrating successes in a way that's different. So we wind up having like virtual happy hours to celebrate a new launch instead of actually getting together for a beer. So those things I think they're really hard for everybody. I have tried selectively to do some, 6 foot socially distant walks with some of my team just to
Hmm.
see them. Where now, as we start coming into out of lockdown in California, I think you'll see more. I'll be encouraging a little bit more team meetings where we might meet outside, on my patio with 4 or 5 people spread out with masks. So those things are all really challenging. And I think personally, the other thing that's been harder for me is just creating the discipline of routine in a day that also can last longer, I think, and start earlier
Right.
because you just have more. I think you're less efficient, and the team is less efficient in many levels. So you wind up working a little bit longer to make up for that lack of efficiency, and then you're always in problem solving mode. Not that everything's a problem, but you have to think through how do you do what you need to do? How do you launch a product? How do you solve a production problem without actually being at the plant, without actually going out into the field and talking to your customer, or how do you get feedback from consumers when you can't do a post shopping survey? So all these things are challenging, and they impact the way that you work on a day-to-day basis pretty tremendously. I think the first 2 weeks were everybody's a bit of shock, but I think we're operating pretty effectively as a team now, and getting a lot done considering the fact that we're all staying at home, or most of us are.
So speaking of working from home, I'm curious how, as an executive, you think about growing and retaining talent with work from home, particularly where location is perhaps less important going forward. I'm curious if your views have changed at all.
Totally changed. Yep. I mean, my views historically have been, especially for leaders, you need to be with your team. And so we've had candidates who were like in Portland and weren't going to be able to move, that were terrific candidates that we passed on in the past. We're not passing on them now. We are going to be thinking much differently about our workforce and where they're deployed. We've already had our sales team is a good portion of them are remote because you want your sellers to be close to your customers. A lot of the buyers in our business are in the Midwest and the East Coast. So we've had a distributed sales team. We're also building a distributed operations team because you want people from the company to be close to the manufacturing facilities as well, and close to your suppliers. So we've already had that, but I think now what we're starting to debate is, well, especially with the real estate costs here, do we really need, to have, what kind of an office do we really need? Do we need to have a desk for everybody? In fact, we can't have a desk for everybody. So how do we move to more of a hoteling model where maybe the norm becomes, if you're not actually in R&D or in production, you come in once a week to meet with your team. And we rotate teams that come in, so we make good use of the office space and maintain social distancing. But the norm is instead, the norm used to be work in the office, work from home was the exception. The exception might be work in the office once a week and work from home otherwise. All that's in discussion now. Certainly to the extent that we're in this social distancing period probably for the rest of the year, if not into next year, we're gonna have to do something like that. We don't have if you think about just the math, we don't have the physical space to have the same number of employees in our corporate offices maintaining 6-foot separation. It just doesn't work. So we're gonna have to do something different. But I think every company, in the US is asking these questions and trying to figure out what to do.
Okay, changing gears a little bit to your previous role at Dropbox. You joined relatively early. You helped the company scale from being a startup all the way to being a public company. I'm curious, what the company looked like when you joined, and what were some of the most important things you did to implement it to help the company grow?
So the Dropbox had tremendous product market fit, pretty early on, and had a business model that was pretty powerful, didn't require a lot of marketing spend, and was scaling really, really quite successfully before I got there for sure. But also had aspirations to be, much bigger in business. In the business, the product that they had was very conducive to individuals. They had a nascent business product that they had just launched, and was facing increasing competition with Google launching Google Drive and Google Drive for Teams, Apple obviously with iCloud, and then Microsoft OneDrive was terrible for a long time, and they really invested in it. The product got better and better. So that was where we were. I think the team was strong, like strong technically, especially on the infrastructure side. They had already embarked on an effort to move from AWS onto their own servers, which ultimately was a hugely profitable move for them, and creates some strategic advantage that they otherwise wouldn't have. But from a product standpoint, sales, there was a very small sales team. There were no quota-bearing sales reps, as an example. Everybody was salaried. We didn't really have a good sense as to what's the right market for our business product. The business product was suited fine for a very small business, but any larger business, there were lots of challenges. And then there were a bunch of infrastructure that didn't exist. We had a very small HR team and recruiting and so forth. So that's what kind of that's where we were going in. And a lot of the early work was just to figure out, there's kind of building the basics, bringing in leadership for marketing and the people team and the sales team, and international, starting to get into some markets outside the US. And then trying to understand what's the right motion, the right sales motion, the right product motion. Where's the real sweet spot for what we had? And it took us a while. We had a lot of forays that were into very, very large enterprise. That's a very different sales motion than the self-serve organic model that Dropbox deploys today for the most part, and Atlassian, a bunch of other companies have pioneered. So there's inherently like a trial and error where you're trying to see how far you can push the product. You realize we have to invest a lot in the product in order to go after a certain segment, and you have to decide, are you going to do that or you're not going to do that? So I would say that was the process of growing that business for the first couple of years, just finding the right motion for growing it and the right sales and marketing motion.
I'm curious, when you take a role like that, you're joining, typically working alongside the founders and the CEO. How do you think about like the timeline to get the company to the next phase? How do you think about what I have to accomplish in this next phase as the company grows up?
I mean, a lot of it was in consultation with the founders and the board, and having a sense for in the early stages of business, like where Impossible is now. There's a lot that you don't know, right? The fundamental trajectory of the business is very hard to project. There's so many variables, both positive and negative, that can come into play. So an example, a meat shortage and a pandemic, 6 months ago when we were doing our planning, nobody thought that would happen. And the pandemic has negative effects, the meat shortage has positive effects. So there's just this huge window of uncertainty about where the business can go, and where is your product going to be best received, where is it not going to be well received. And that's kind of where Dropbox was. There's just very large error bars on where we would wind up. And so what you do is you try to have some milestones that are, customer related, product related, growth related, that you can control. So we focused a lot on, and as we're doing now at Impossible, on new product launches. Like getting a product into the market is way more important than kind of making the product perfect. So when were we going to launch the next version of our Dropbox business plan? When were we going to launch the next set of features? We went from one plan, Pro or Plus it's called now, to 2, which was Dropbox Business and Plus. And now I think Dropbox probably has 5 or 6 different plans with different add-ons that you can purchase. So each one of those were new products that we need to think through, and so a lot of the focus on, okay, how do we know we're succeeding, is about milestones related to product launches, the infrastructure project, and making ensuring that we could replicate all of the content, all the information that was on AWS onto our own servers. That had its own set of milestones. Hiring can be a set of milestones that we looked at. So all those things were things that we would align on as a management team and with our board at the beginning of each year. And then at some point, we said, okay, it's time. We next year or 18 months, we want to get to a point where we're cash flow positive. That was a big milestone for us. And I saw yesterday Drew was forecasting that 2022, I think, or 2023, forecasting $1 billion in free cash flow, right? So that's a huge business from, from a business that broke even probably, I think it was 2017 where we crossed the cash flow positive, or late 2016 cash flow positive path mark. So those are the kinds of things and kinds of milestones that we would focus on as the company grew.
That's incredible. You know, a lot of the founders that we work with, after they've gone out of the seed stage, they're at the Series A beyond. They've achieved some scale, call it $10 to $50 million in revenue. I'm curious how you would look at like generically a company like that and what it takes to get that company to like the very large scale of the companies that you typically work with. $1 billion plus in revenue. What are the types of things that companies really need to do to get to that next level?
Well, I think understanding how big the market really is and being honest with yourself about how that market is shaping. I was talking to an entrepreneur recently, has a great product, but didn't have a good sense, and is getting early product market fit, has distribution in a couple of interesting places, but didn't really have a good sense as to, well, how big could this market be? And I think you really need to have a vision for, how big could this be? And so for us, one of the things that attracted me about Impossible is, Pat's view is that animal-based protein is an antiquated technology that's going to be replaced entirely by plant-based technology. Like it's a technology platform change. It's going from a PC to mobile. And if you're not in mobile, you're not going to have a business. And so that's a big, bold statement. And if you dig under the hood and start understanding, well, what would you have to believe that's true? You can find evidence that could happen. So then it's your job to make it happen. But if I go back to like, okay, when you're talking to entrepreneurs who have like that kind of a vision, often they've thought it through like 10 steps beyond what a logical person would have thought through, and really understand where that 10 million or $30 million company could be in 10 years, and have at least some sketch in their head as to how they're going to get there and why others should believe in that. So I think that's super important, and only the founder can have that. That's not something that you can hire in for. I remember talking to the founder of DoorDash about how they thought about this. I guess he was a student at Stanford Business School, and he had the idea with two of his friends, and they realized they needed to learn more about logistics. So he took a job at FedEx, not like in the corporate, he's a Stanford MBA, probably could have worked, in headquarters or whatever. He took a job as a driver because he wanted to understand how they manage logistics, and then he moved into the warehouse, so then by the time he gets there, he's really focused from the beginning on this problem of how do we help restaurants who aren't inherently going to be great at delivery. And he had thought through the problem kind of all the way through, and then something like HoboGo comes around, and lo and behold, he's thought this through and he's ready to take advantage of it. So I think it's really important, no matter what the scale or size, to have that vision thought through, so that you can both attract people to your cause, and you can start thinking, well, if that's going to happen, what do I need to do now in order to anticipate it? And Larry Page at Google, he had that to like 10x, right? I remember him saying, we're going to build a map of the world to 1 meter resolution. This is like 2005. And I was like, well, how do you do that? So, but that was the vision, very simply stated: map of the world, 1 meter resolution. And if we have that, we'll figure out how to make money. We'll figure out how to pay for it, all that stuff. He didn't worry himself with that. He focused on that big, bold vision.
So market size and vision. Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. Okay, so hiring is a big thing that companies need to think about when they're really scaling. When it comes to hiring executives, what are some of the qualities that you look for? And I'm curious, what makes a good exec in your view?
So I think it's different. Like if I went back to like Google days, huge company is very different than a smaller startup. I think you have to bet on, you wind up betting more on potential in smaller companies, because a lot of people who have seen big scale, they don't want to, it's easier to stay in the big job in a big company than to leave and take a bet on yourself and on a startup. And so you either need to find the person who's maybe been at a big successful company for a while and is kind of tired and or a little bored and not challenged. And there are lots of people like that who have left and been successful. And you look at Claire Hughes Johnson at Stripe, who has done a great job in helping the founders there scale. And Francoise Bracher went to Pinterest recently, but before that, she was she did a bunch of stuff. So I think you can either find the person who totally fits your profile and is willing to leave a big job, but that's pretty rare, or you need to bet on the potential. And so I find often like betting on people who haven't necessarily held the job that they are applying for, but they've seen enough to know what great looks like. They've been in an organization that demonstrates really strong development of people, and they are willing to kind of roll their sleeves up and build again, right? Because that's super important. That they're willing to actually tackle the problems themselves. They're willing to write the job description of the person they're hiring themselves. That all these things that, of course, you have to do as a startup. Everybody in a startup knows that, but in big companies, you don't have to do that. So you want someone who's seen all that, and I tend to look for people who have challenged themselves, who have been in companies that we respect, that I respect. And then you also have to think of the whole team as a set of complementary skills. And we have a lot of tech people at Impossible. We're about a third food, about a third biotech, and about a third tech. And that combination is actually pretty interesting, very culturally different. But thinking about the whole balance is important as well. So what is your executive team ultimately going to look like?
Have you made any common mistakes that you would advise people to avoid when it comes to hiring?
I think you're going to make mistakes. So when I was at Google, one of my jobs was to hire a bunch of country managers. Probably hired 15 in 18 months. So at country managers in like Russia, Turkey, Israel, and of the 15, 3 today are like superstars at Google or elsewhere. 3 we had to fire within a year, right? So you're going to have that kind of a hit where you just can't. Hiring is imperfect, and so you have to accept that. And then like once you realize this person's wrong, often they're wrong because of cultural reasons, not because of skill or will necessarily. But they have a, for whatever reason, they just don't reflect the culture that you want in the organization, and then you just need to move really quickly and move them out. But it's a very imperfect science, and I've been lucky and I've been unlucky, and I think that's probably true for pretty much everybody who's been in this kind of a role.
So I'm curious, between Google, Dropbox, Impossible, all very high growth companies, like really amazing stories. Are there any overarching differences, commonalities in terms of culture, challenges that you've noticed and take note of now?
Well, I think Google had such strong product market fit and such an incredibly, insanely powerful business model that it enabled it to invest in a lot of different areas very quickly without worrying too much about near-term financial return. And it had has an incredible set of founders who thought from the beginning very long-term and had as I was saying before, pretty strong vision of what they wanted both the company to look like, what they thought the world would look like, and what Google needed to do to be successful in that world. That's insanely rare, right? I would say Dropbox is a little bit more typical in that super strong founders with really compelling technical vision, but the market was crowded and competitors were much larger. And those competitors, now I guess that was true for Google very early on, but quickly it wasn't. those competitors also had strong technical teams that could create similar functionality. So it was a very different set of dynamics, different set of challenges. In fact, you kind of had to, I think you had to work harder to some degree to really make the business successful, because the competition was so much stronger than the competition. The competition Google faced early on was Microsoft, which was distracted by antitrust and a bunch of stuff. Yahoo, which wasn't a strong technical company, and that was kind of it. There were a bunch of smaller search engines at the time. So I think that's different. And then I think the other things that shape it is the what you're trying to achieve. If you're like Impossible, and you're trying to achieve something that on its face seems very, very difficult to do, right? You're trying to change all human behavior to shift how we eat, from eating animals to eating plants, basically. That's insanely hard. And you have to be, and our founder is super focused on that vision, to the exclusion of everything else. As he says, it would be easy to be another just kind of veggie burger company, but that's not going to work. We're going to have to truly replicate everything about beef, not just ground beef, but eventually steak and other things as well. So the dynamics of all three are, I would say, are all very different. And what you're trying to achieve and the external environment do shape the culture and how you operate, and how much risk you can take on, all that stuff.
Really interesting. Thank you for sharing. So, when it comes to your current role, I'm curious about, what are a few of your biggest concerns at the moment, or things that keep you up at night?
It's changed. I mean, when we started, it was scaling production, and that's still a big challenge. So a lot of your companies, probably the production is infinite, right? You need, if you're a software company, you just need another instance on Amazon, or you don't even need to think about another instance on Amazon. It just happens. Whereas if you're building a physical product, you have to build capacity for that product, and that takes time. That takes tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. You have to invest in a plant. So you have to plan over longer time horizons. You have to take risk ahead of knowing whether the demand is there. So yeah, we've had to build multiple manufacturing facilities with only, our prediction of what the demand will look like, and how soon will that demand ramp up. And so that's I would say that's a huge challenge for us. And it will always be a challenge for us as the rate of growth of the company is so high. Another challenge is just the recruiting aspect. For us, we've been fortunate. There are a lot of people are really attracted to the mission, and we have not had any trouble recruiting people. But talent is always something that you're looking for, and you're trying to build in the company. And very quickly, people who worked well in the role that they were in a year ago, if the company's almost tripling in size, well, it's very possible that they are totally at their limit a year later. And you need to either help them get through that by helping them hire, or you need to sometimes find other people from the outside who've seen that next level of growth and can come in and help the company grow. So those are challenges. I think for us, the data in this industry relative to software and the internet in particular is much rougher, much coarser. So we get good data in the grocery segment, but in restaurant segment, we sell to a distributor who sells to another distributor who sells to the restaurant. So the signal back is really attenuated, and a big challenge for us is how do we create signal? How do we create direct connection with consumers and with the restaurant operators, so that we have a better sense as to what's going on and what the competitive dynamics are like. So those are some of the things that are challenging for us. The things that are not challenging, we know as a team, we know exactly what we need to do. Like in software at Dropbox, as an example, like we had a great product with core Dropbox, but it was always hard to figure out, well, what's the next product? Like, what's the next completely new product? And then how do you get product market fit for that? It's hard. For us, it's not as hard, because it's pretty obvious that if you can do a plant-based burger, There's similar products like sausage. There's pork. There's chicken. There's a bunch of stuff we can apply the same technology to. We don't have to invent a new class of products. We just need to replicate a product that exists today, but from plants. And to some degrees, that simplifies, how we focus and where we focus our time.
So some couple personal questions. So I know you're a big Ironman triathlete. Are you still training? What's your daily routine like today? How do you fit it all in?
Well, they canceled all the races, or they're slowly canceling all the races this year. They're kind of, I have to assume that it's highly unlikely that there will be races, because the Ironman that I do in Arizona is in November, and there's 2,500 people in it. So I suspect it's not going to happen. I don't know, but I suspect. So one of the challenges is just being motivated. So what do you train for when you are looking at a year of no racing? And so I've just been focusing on Strava, trying to better my times on a couple of hill climbs in the area here. But yeah, because the day is a little more flexible in some ways. Some days, like today, I had an hour at lunch, so I just hopped on my bike and got a ride in. But other days it doesn't happen. But yeah, I'm still training. I think it's a way to get out of the house. It's a way to get away from the screen, which we're all staring at all day now. And it's just healthy for me, and it's always been something that I've done. So I think it's one routine that is good to keep while so many other routines have gone by the wayside.
So the last time you spoke at Pear, you recommended the book, David Goggins' book, Can't Hurt Me, which is great. I'm curious if you have any other recommendations for people today.
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's see. So I'm reading a biography, or I guess it's a memoir of a chef. It's called Kitchen in Confidential. It's by Anthony Bourdain, who passed away, but he's a pretty famous chef, and it's quite a interesting insider view of what it's like to be in a kitchen and in a restaurant. Whether it's he starts off at sort of a dive bar type of operation in Cape Cod, I think it is, and he winds up at Michelin star restaurants in the U.S. and in France, and everything that goes on in the kitchen. And for being in the food industry with restaurants as a big part of our business, I thought it was helpful just to get to understand a little bit about what happens in a kitchen and what the different people do and all the personalities and all that. So that's been a pretty fun book to be listening to, actually. That's what it's a audiobook.
Audiobook. I'm familiar with it. I've heard it's really good. So those are the questions I had. I think we have a couple extra minutes. Maybe we try out the Q&A feature.
Sure.
Try to do a couple of questions from the audience.
Sure. Do you just want to pick them off?
Yeah, let's do that. Can you see them as well?
Let me see. I couldn't see them in full screen. Yeah, I can. Do you want to whichever ones you want to focus on?
Sure. I think this first one's interesting. Basically, how could the learnings and ideas of Impossible Foods help developing countries in addressing their protein needs? I think that's really interesting. I don't know how you guys think about that.
So Pat has spent quite a bit of time in China. And I don't know if you call China a developing country anymore, probably not. But nevertheless, China has a huge challenge in that they have had repeated outbreaks of illness among their, the swine population, among their cattle and chickens, and it is this last one. The swine flu wiped out a third of the pig population. Pork prices skyrocket. You already have people who are living at the margin, and now they can't afford pork. So it's a public health issue. It's a public food safety issue for them, and they're realizing that they have to solve it. Currently, they have to import a substantial amount of their protein from places like the U.S. That creates insecurity for them and creates risk. They don't have enough land, and the land's not suitable for raising cattle at the scale that they would need to feed the population in the future. And they're seeing something like, I think I read 100 million people a year shifting from a more of agrarian diet to an urban one. So they've got this huge issue where they're going to have to figure out a protein strategy that makes sense, and they're absolutely open to talking to companies like ours about, well, what could you do differently to create a sustainable supply chain and a sustainable source of protein for your country. So developing countries have a huge interest in seeing this work. Now, in a lot of other countries, a large number of people are involved in raising animals. So that's a threat to some degree to them if those animals become less valuable because there are alternatives. But it's a huge issue and something that we're absolutely focused on.
Very interesting. A question that's here is about the restaurant industry. Obviously, right now, things are not looking great. I wonder if you have a perspective or any thoughts on the future there.
So I think there's the near-term future and the long-term future. I think if you assume that there's going to be some solution to COVID, which I think just for sanity we have to assume, once that is in place, whether it's a vaccine or effective treatment or herd immunity, do I believe that humans have an innate need to gather and eat? I absolutely do. So the restaurant business, especially once we get past COVID, will come back. It'll be robust, and there will be plenty of people eating out, no doubt. Probably won't be in the same restaurants that you're in today, because a lot of those restaurants are just not going to have the financial resources to make it through. OpenTable predicts about a quarter of all restaurants will close permanently. And that's just one prediction. It might be low. But the good thing is restaurants are inherently an entrepreneurial business. People love food. People love to start restaurants all around the world. So new restaurants will emerge, and we'll be eating out, I think, very much in a similar way to today, but it will take quite a bit of time. In the near term, the next, until we have that solution, it's going to be really tough, because there'll be a subset of people who just don't feel safe going out or eating out or being close to people. There will be regulations like you see in China that will say only a quarter of your seats can be occupied, and it's very hard to make a restaurant work with a quarter of seats occupied. The experience itself, if you're going to a restaurant where the host is wearing a mask and you have to wear a mask except when you're eating, it's not going to be as appealing for people. So there's a real transition that's going to be problematic. And what are the entrepreneurial restaurants doing? They're expecting that's going to take a while. They're shifting to delivery, takeout. In some cases, they're selling stock product that only they have access to directly to consumers. So we have over 140 restaurants that are taking Impossible Burger, the boxes that we sell to them, which are 5-pound bricks, and selling those directly to consumers. So the restaurant industry is inherently entrepreneurial. It's going to get hit hard, but it'll come back. It'll just be very different or it'll take a while when it does come back.
All right, maybe last question. When you're thinking about joining a company or a startup, how do you weigh the importance between the people and the product in the market? And I've heard you speak a lot about founders and the power of the founders, but obviously the product is important too. How do you think about it?
I think it's a lot about the mission and the mission, the product, the founder. All those three all matter a lot. If you can't get excited about the mission, then you're just doing it for a job, and that's not. At the end of the day, you want to have an impact. And I think for those who were fortunate to be at Google early, everybody thought that what we were doing was benefiting humankind, because people had access to information they never had access to. And all of us had stories, including me, of a neighbor who was sick and wasn't getting good medical advice, found a doctor on the other side of the country just by Googling over and over. And that brought you to work. And that also allowed you to attract people. People want to work for those kinds of companies. And that's why at Impossible, we're able to hire really good people, because people want to have an impact and they want to believe that what they're doing is going to have a positive effect on the world. So I think mission is super important, and mission and founder are super tightly tied. You know, companies with strong missions have founders that are visionary and think long term and don't waver from that vision. So those two things matter, and the product, you know, for me at least, I'm not the kind of person who can sit in a room and figure out the product that's going to the first product, right? The P0 product. So for me, I'd like to see that there is traction, and that what the problems that they have going forward is more of a scaling a successful product, less than finding a successful product. So I think those things are super important. And if you're a founder, you know, it's your fundamental job is to have that vision and to talk about it every day. I mean, Pat, I don't think a day goes by that he doesn't repeat some aspect of the vision on TV, with teams, to a customer. And, you know, that makes a huge difference in how all of us think about work.
All right. Well, I think we'll leave it at that. Dennis, thank you so much for your time and for sharing these insights with us. I found it really valuable, so I really appreciate it.
Thanks, and thanks everybody. Take care.
Everyone, before you leave, thank you very much for joining. If you are interested, our next speaker is on effective outbound sales with Puyan Salehi, the CEO of Scratchpad, and that's May 26th at 4 p.m. So we look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you.